Okay, we are live streaming, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee. Today is Monday, December 18th, and we will be here from 6 to 7 p.m. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chairs, Jose and Leah, will facilitate tonight's meeting. Next slide, please. I'm going to take a moment to go over some meeting logistics before we get started. This is a virtual meeting. The meeting is being recorded for later viewing and is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. A copy of this recording will be posted on the city's transition webpage under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. Committee members, please take a moment to change your chat settings to everyone so folks listening in can follow along. Please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available tonight. You can submit questions or comments through the Q&A function. We may not be able to answer all the questions during the meeting, but all of your comments do become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we're not going to be taking verbal public comment, but you can sign up now to give verbal public comment at the January 10th committee meeting, or you can submit written public comment at any time through our comment form online by calling 311 or by emailing transition@portlandoregon.gov. With that, I will pass it to Jose to review tonight's agenda.
Thanks, Julia. Tonight's agenda, it includes the fiscal year 2024-25 one-time transition budget and the annual cost of the new organizational structure and funding those costs. Before we adjourn our meeting today, we'll close with a brief review of our next steps. Next slide, please. We welcome Shoshana Oppenheim to introduce and lead us through a discussion about the budget development for the transition team for the fiscal year 2024-25. Shoshana?
Great. Thank you so much, Jose. Hello, my name is Shoshana Oppenheim. I'm the transition project manager, and I use she, they pronouns. And I really appreciate the GTAC's interest and willingness to provide insight and your thoughts on the transition budget. I hope today's conversation will be both informative and collaborative as we talk through our assumptions and we have a conversation about both our one-time costs and the ongoing costs. So next slide, please. This slide shows our initial cost estimates for the different bodies of work for the charter transition in fiscal year 24-25. The cost estimates shown here are limited to transition projects supported by one-time general fund resources. Cost estimates for the ongoing costs for the proposed organizational changes and the facilities costs are not included in the one-time cost estimate. The cost estimate will become more certain over time as we learn more about the needs of the project and what's needed to be successful in our deliverables both this fiscal year and next fiscal year. The fiscal year budget request will be funded with a combination of underspending in the current year budget and additional one-time general fund resources. We will submit a request for the fiscal year 23 in the 23-24 spring supplemental budget monitoring process to carry over any underspending from our current budget. Carrying over funds means that unspent funds are not swept into the available general fund resources. And this has been a strategy that we've used over the last couple fiscal years to fund both charter reform and the transition project. It's unclear if any one-time funds will be available. Any additional resources needed to support charter transition in fiscal year 24-25 will be included in the mayor's proposed budget and will be available only if there are one-time funds available. For voter education specifically, we anticipate spending $742,000 in fiscal year 24-25. An estimated $517,000 for activities to reach communities that the city has traditionally had a hard time reaching, and $225,000 for a broader voter education campaign, which includes materials and activities. The voter education estimate does not include expenditures outside the transition budget. For example, costs related to candidate education and informational sessions. Those costs are included in the auditor's budget. Costs associated with the county's voter education and administration activities are also not in the transition budget. Those costs are managed by the counties themselves. And we'll talk a little bit more about the voter education budget in a few slides. So next slide, please. To understand the staffing costs, this slide outlines the bodies of work represented in the by the full-time employees for fiscal year 24-25. Over the course of the next fiscal year, our focus will be on engaging and educating the community on the new organization, educating hard-to-reach voters, and important deliverables will be our change management and onboarding plans. Additionally, we will be ensuring the pieces are in place to recruit the new city administrator and other city leadership positions. Next slide, please. In the previous slides, we discussed both the staffing and the budget. In the previous slide, we discussed both staffing and our budget. I wanted to talk a little bit more about what our change management activities. We have built a change management plan focused on supporting employees through the multifaceted changes facing the city organization. This table outlines the cost categories associated with implementing that change management plan. The proposed budget builds on training and leadership support delivered in this fiscal year and invests in the strengths of our professional development programs. Some exciting elements of the plan include peer city panel discussions, creating and launching a change management training program, toolkits for managers and supervisors, and investing in our employee support network. Throughout the planning and implementation of our change management plan, we are building relationships and partners with the Bureau of Human Resources and other colleagues across the city to ensure consistency with our other ongoing structures and trainings provided citywide, including connecting with several emerging leader programs. On January 10th, we will share the final change management plan and discuss the deliverables and our investment in our partnership with the Bureau of Human Resources to deliver employee-focused resources, supporting our city team to lead through and manage change. Next slide, please. I'll now pass it to Julia Meyer and June Reyes to walk us through the community engagement budget.
June, do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it?
You can do it. There's like crying children in the background right now.
Yeah. I'm happy to do it. Thanks, Shoshana. So the estimated subtotal for community engagement in fiscal year 24-25, so again, starting July 1st, 2024, is $63,360. And that figure encompasses costs for technology, interpretation, and logistics to support public participation in the transition. There's kind of two buckets here. The first bucket is the Government Transition Advisory Committee itself and kind of associated costs. That total allocated to support this committee is about $59,000. It includes things like email and internet access for all of you, language interpretation services, volunteer stipends, and event sponsorships and honorariums associated with your community education efforts. The event sponsorship and honorariums line is really dedicated to supporting traditionally underrepresented communities in City Hall decision-making, and it's to reimburse for costs that can be a barrier to participation, such as staff time, food, or childcare. The sponsorships can be provided by contacting June, and the amount will be allocated based on the specific needs of a group. The second bucket on this slide is kind of community engagement more broadly. It encompasses costs for community listening sessions and other engagement tools for gathering community feedback on topics we know that are going to come up starting in like mid-summer of 2024. So that's things like the future council operations work that our districts and council operations subcommittee is working on, engagement in the budget process and code revisions. And it covers costs like that would be associated with something like a listening session, like American Sign Language and Spanish language interpretation, and having some kind of in-person and virtual or hybrid opportunities available for public participation. And with that, I think I'm turning it back to Shoshana for the next slide. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. The City of Portland Transition Team is collaborating with City Elections Office and Multnomah County. And we are focused on developing a robust, nonpartisan, multilingual, accessible voter education campaign on the city's new election methods and the new to Portland changes in our form of government. The city's voter education campaign aims to eliminate barriers to civic participation by promoting inclusive and inclusivity, and ensuring that every voter, regardless of our background or circumstance, has access to the information and resources needed to exercise their right to vote. Accessible voter education is essential for all Portlanders. Next slide, please. So, what are the next steps in our budget development process? We're likely to see that actually today, the mayor's budget guidance memo just came out. I haven't read the entire thing yet, and we'll be sharing it with the GTAC shortly. Internal to the transition team, we'll be aligning our communications and projections with the budget estimates that we outlined for you today. Our team will also be building out our onboarding plan and determining what's needed to support the process to onboard new to leadership and elected officials and the new city council operations group. Our facilities team is working on a proposal related to district offices and will report back to council on their findings shortly. We will continue to manage to the existing budget and monitor the impact on our overall carryover estimates. We're happy to answer any questions that you have, but I think that you'll see on the screen, there's some questions that we have for you that may help lead our conversation. It would be very helpful for us to know if you see your priorities in our budget estimates. Is there anything surprising here? Importantly, we built this budget to faithfully implement the will of the voters and align with the city's core values. So the question for you is, do you see that reflected in the budget estimates that we've provided? This budget should align with the transition plan as well as the voter education and engagement plans. And so that's what we're hoping it reflects to you. So I don't know if you want me to pass it to you, Jose, to manage questions or how you'd like to engage with this part of the conversation.
Yes, thank you, Shoshana. I'll take it from here. but yes, so if anyone has questions, please raise your hand. Juanita, let's kick it off with you. You're muted, Juanita.
Believe I always do that anyway. Yeah, yes, well, definitely there's a lot of questions in some of the items because it's not a lot of explanation about it. And I don't know, for example, how did that budget was developed in terms that you use, what did you spend in the past? Or, or did you, because, one of my concerns is in community engagement. I've been told, because it's been an issue that I'm concerned about. And basically what I've been told is that we have to staff people in the new budget that will be responsible for community engagement, and that that should be enough. And now I'm seeing, and that's proposed I think it's $63,000 for community engagement. I'm assuming that is in addition to staff people that will be in that department, but so that does not align with the mission to implement the board-approved charter amendments, because the charter amendments specifically ask for a more community engagement and a participatory form of government. So I will leave it there.
Yeah, I'll let Julia and June speak specifically about the community engagement component of the budget. But in terms of the rest of the budget, the process was looking at our original estimates for various things such as voter education and our voter education plan. You'll see that their expenses, that the expenses that we plan to expend next fiscal year are exclusive of our current estimates. So we made projections on how much we were going to spend. We looked at how much we did expend, and then next year is when those activities are really going to hit. For staffing, we looked at our current expenses and made projections into next fiscal year. So it's a combination of our spend down in this fiscal year, what activities we think will hit into next fiscal year, and our projections of our what we'll be carrying over into the next fiscal year.
Thank you.
Juanita, can I jump in? And I'll be brief because I see all the hands. And I feel like we should say this anytime we talk about budget related to implementation of the voter approved charter amendments. For right now, for this part of tonight's agenda, we are only talking about the cost of the transition. Then we will shift in our agenda to talk about costs of the future form of government and election system. So I just want to be very clear, because I think it can be confusing. So this is, a year of kind of the implementation. Juanita, this is not how much money the city is going to invest in community engagement within a new form of government. That is a different conversation that is also very important. This is just in the transition itself, just to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Perfect. Destiny?
Thank you. Could you go back to the slide where it was like GTAC sponsorships and honorarium? For that one, I know it was mentioned that we could reach out to June, but like, how are we going to know which community events have met the criteria of providing additional like childcare stipends or transportation stipends or food or things like that? Is there going to be any type of criteria, or do we just ask because they requested it? I'm just wondering, like, who is going to be able to take up those funds and apply for that as fast as possible, and which like communities take longer and also have more barriers, and like how are we going to spread out that funding but also like allocate it? I'm just wondering that in a use way.
Yeah, I can chime in here. So in terms of that event sponsorships and honorariums, I think when we look back to the list of those who've been left out of decision hall or city hall decision making, folks are able to, folks can ask for that, and we encourage folks to ask for funding if they need it, if they identify in those groups. And so we do have some language that we put on the GTAC web resources webpage where you can download, you can look at, an email invitation and a little PS if, you feel like to participate, you need additional expenses covered, essential expenses like staff time, childcare, etc. Please reach out. And so in terms of these sponsorships, we're really doing that on a case-by-case basis. So for some folks, one organization said, hey, I really would love to have help finding a space for this presentation so I can expose my community members into a different space. So kind of what folks might need and ask for is really different. And then we want to be flexible to that. And I think in terms of allocation, something we could do is, I don't know, I think, we have the set aside of funding that we think might be useful to be able to for folks to participate. And I guess was your other part of the question kind of how are we going to spread the funding out? What was that piece?
I'm just wondering, when I'm thinking of enrollment, is there priority on who gets funding or who gets pushed? But if it just takes a while to schedule community events and presentations. So I'm wondering if there will be any kind of lens on priority pick and things like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great question. As of right now, it's sort of a case-by-case basis as folks have reached out or I'm reaching out to folks and they need, additional resources to be able to participate. And we haven't yet run into that situation. And so, I think it probably is worth thinking about if we get to the point of prioritizing how we kind of go through that process.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I have 3 or 4 questions. They're all about the next slide number 9. And I think I'll just pose them all and then, please answer them as appropriate. I presume that there's a written plan and that we've even been told about it, maybe even reviewed it, but I'd like to know sort of what the overall plan is for both broad voter education and hard to reach voter contact. Certainly there are going to be efforts beyond those listed here. Earned media, public service announcements. This is going to be brand new for a lot of people. And actually it's brand new for everybody. And so there's going to be a whole lot of communication, information, education that's going to be required. And I'd like to be able to see what the overall sort of comprehensive plan is. I'm mostly.
Do you want me to take them one by one, Joe?
Oh, no, I'd be delighted if you would, Shoshana.
Yeah, so I don't see Sophia on the call, but I wonder if there's somebody else from the voter education subcommittee that could answer with more detail. And I know that there is a plan. I just haven't been at the subcommittee meetings to know if you've reviewed it and discussed it.
Does anybody know whether we've had a chance to see that plan?
I'll take it as a non-member of that subcommittee, but anyone else jump in. That subcommittee has met twice. I think the bulk of the last meeting was spent on that. So the voter ed plan in its entirety was presented kind of verbally and in slide format, and subcommittee members offered feedback, and the draft written plan in narrative form is also out and about in the subcommittee for written feedback that we'll come back to at the third subcommittee meeting on January 9th.
This is Bill. You said that better than I, Julia.
Okay. And so Julia, we will end up seeing that eventually, the whole group.
That's correct.
Great. The two other questions, which I think are related. You know, the city has a long history of doing outreach and education and engagement, which sort of makes a little bit of a splash and then goes away, makes a splash and goes away. And I wonder, and maybe, I don't know who this goes to exactly, but I'd like to know that there are going to be, you know, intentional efforts to make these relationships sustainable into the future, and not simply one more touch from the city to community-based organizations and to communities. And in sort of that same spirit, I'm wondering whether these organizational grants are going to include our efforts to reach out to people, and whether the organizations that have contracted with the city to help with reaching voters, hard to reach voters, will also be available to us to reach those same people with more general information about the transition.
Joe, I'm not sure I heard a question in there.
Well, let me ask two.
Well, Joe,
Yeah.
send in your questions. We only have a few minutes left and there's a lot of hands up. So type out your questions and then we'll make sure they get answered. I just want to make sure we get to everyone instead of having you ask multiple questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Juliet?
Yeah, thank you, Jose. I'll just ask one question and put the others in the chat. The thing that surprises me is that I don't see anything about change management for the new council. And they are going to be a big part of the change. So just would like to hear about that. Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Juliet. That is something that we're still working on. We're calling it our onboarding plan. I was just speaking with Tate earlier today, and that term of change management, you know, how do we transform these new people from residents of Portland to the new leaders of Portland? So you'll see that that's in our things to come line is a broader understanding of what that will include. But we expect it to include absolutely the required trainings for elected officials, understanding public meetings, all of that, but also understanding Portland as a whole. And we're designing a lot of those materials to not just be available for our new elected officials, but also for the public as a whole.
Thank you.
More to come on that.
Okay.
Zach?
And if you have any thoughts, you know, we welcome those thoughts about what you think would be needed to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, I hope they would have some awareness of, trying to minimize turnover in the wake of all these changes.
Yeah.
Zach, you'll be the last question. Go ahead.
I have a question about on slide 8, the slide prior to this. And I may have missed this. I'm sorry, Julia, if you mentioned it, but just trying to like piece together these community listening sessions. And the second, on the community engagement, second line, community listening session number 2 on Title III, being in fiscal year 24-25. If I recall, the plan was that, first of all, just making sure that suggests that there's going to be more than one community session on Title III. And then just timing wise, if there has been changes to when Title III is going to be reviewed, because if I recall correctly, it was to be June, which would be technically this fiscal year.
I can answer that. So I will say that in terms of code revisions for Title III, this engagement draft, I think, has been outdated. So I just wanted to say that in some ways this is more of a placeholder for code, like a code revision community listening session at this point, as we didn't have all of the information in building this piece of the budget as we had put this together, but we do anticipate that we will have other needs for potential need for community listening session on a code revision.
Okay.
There.
And the goal of that is just, I mean, are they're all going to precede the actual changes as they go to council, or was there a vision of having a community session following those changes as kind of like a information, I don't know, deliverable of trying to get the message out of what has changed?
I will say that the ones for two, the original idea is just like, you know, as we put out a draft, we would want another opportunity for folks to comment on it. I think with the way that code revisions are actually working, the two sort of session kind of public comment staggered may not fit that schedule. And so while that's sort of the intent to kind of do good community engagement around things, we recognize that it's not possible for everything that we put out. So I think you will probably expect an update on what that code revision schedule is going to look like. But I also want to turn it to Tate if there's anything I'm missing here.
Thanks, June. Hi, everyone. Tate White, she, they pronouns. Yeah, I'm not gonna take up too much time, but I took notes to pass on to Diana. I do think that the budget is earmarked there, but the schedule of that one is sort of shifting, and we'll update you when we know more. Thank you.
Thank you, Tate. Juanita, your hand is just.
Oh, I'm
elected.
sorry. I'm going to get it down. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. We're out of time for this session. The good thing about today's meeting, that's unlike other meetings, is that we're gonna have the budget staff here till the end of the meeting. So if we move on to the next section and there's time, we'll go back and answer any questions that were left over from this section. But thank you for putting in the chat so we can answer them if we don't get back to them. So now I will pass it on to Leah, so we can continue.
Thanks, Jose. The good news is I'm going to hand it right back to people to talk more about the budget. We're going to move on to talking about annual costs of the new organizational structure and funding these. So I'm going to pass it back to Shoshana and Shannon this time as well. Thank you.
Hi there.
So I'll just pass it to Shannon, who's our financial analyst, to talk about ongoing costs.
Okay, lots of passing. All right, so last week, or not last week, when I was here previously, a couple weeks ago, I had talked a bit about the budget, and so I'll just do a quick recap of that and explain kind of where we are with the ongoing costs of what we know so far and what we don't know, and what is more to come over the next couple months, so we can actually have a better understanding of what is funded and what is not from the new organizational structure. So in November 1st, there was a resolution that was passed by council. So, and I'm sorry, if I can't see questions, so if someone could keep track of that for me, that would be awesome. So when this resolution passed, the total projected costs for the resolution of all the org changes that included charter related org changes as well as non-charter related org changes was $23.9 million. Or excuse me, it was 23.9 million. When they took then the figure that you'll often hear is 13 million. And so what that figure is it's the amount after you reduce what is now allocated for the mayor's office and council. So the 13 million is what is left that does not have a fund source. A couple of caveats to the 13 million. That represents the gross costs. It does not represent the net cost. So for example, if there are positions that are within that 13 million figure, that it's anticipated that existing positions will be reallocated to fund them. For example, there is a chief administrative officer now there, which is Michael Jordan. It's anticipated, because there will not be his position will not exist in the new form of government, that his position will be reallocated to fund part of that 13 million that does not currently have funding. So the analysis was done as such on November 1st, just to say, here is the gross figure. We'll figure out what the net is over the course of the 24-25 budget process. So when council approved the city organization resolution, they were very specific to say this does not allocate resources to fund each aspect of the organizational chart. Instead, they signaled their intent to identify resources through the budget process. Then a couple weeks later, on November 15th, council passed a current appropriation target ordinance, which funded the foundational pieces of the organizational chart with general fund resources. So it took a portion of that 13 million that was not funded, and they consider that the core pieces of the reform. So that is council offices. So it's a council member and 1 staff, 5 staff in the mayor's office and the mayor, a city administrator, and as well as some business operational support to stand up that city administrator's office. And that together came to a gross amount of $2.5 million, which is that required additional resources. So that was passed as part of the current appropriation level target in November. And the council said, or the intention behind kind of that ordinance was that it would be funded with general fund resources that would be produced from a constraint. So there are around the same time, the budget memo 1 came out, and the budget memo 1 said, we are in a different financial environment that we've been in the past few years. We're not expecting new forecasted ongoing general fund resources or one-time additional resources. And so expect that Bureau should plan for a constraint to fund anything new, including the 2.5 million to stand up the city administrator's office, as well as for council and the mayor. So so that's where we left it a couple weeks ago. Today around 4 p.m. We got the budget memo number 2, and budget memo number 2 said, okay, we know what the constraint is. The constraint is a 5% reduction to general fund bureau's budgets. It has a couple caveats. Those caveats are, it holds the public safety bureaus harmless from the 5% reduction, and it also holds that 2.5 million that was included in the current appropriation level target. It holds that harmless as well. So that new money that we got to stand up city administrator's office, we don't have to, that's not subject to the 5% reduction. However, we are still unclear, and I'm sorry this is not satisfying. I wish I could say more. It's still not clear to us at this point when it comes to the rest of charter. So things like the assistant city administrator, the deputy city administrator positions, how those will be funded. So there is another memo that's forthcoming that will explain to finance managers, so people like me, like how to actually budget for those positions. And that is critical to know, because that technical guidance will say to finance managers, either you have to take an existing position to fund these new positions, or you can request the resources generated from that 5% cut. Those are two those are like the 2 options to fund the new positions. So we'll be looking to the mayor's office to say what when that technical guidance comes out from CBO, I would assume that it will specify the positions that he wants to fund, and then the mechanism for which we can fund that. We can request funding for those. So those would be by either realigning existing costs, which will most likely come in the form of a existing position, or because most of these costs are position related, or it could come through the 5% reduction. My understanding is it's all realignments, all from existing positions, but again, it doesn't explicitly say that in the memo. So we're still waiting to really understand the extent to which we're able to request these resources or move resources around to fund the various aspects of the org chart. So it's not the most satisfying answer. I wish we knew more. We have a lot of work to do between now and February 16th when the budget is due. So as soon as we know more, like this third memo is supposed to come out in early January. I believe CBO will be speaking at the next meeting that you have in January, and can hopefully we will have a clear idea of kind of what that guidance is, so then we can figure out really what elements of the rest of the org chart that were not funded through the current appropriation level, how we can do that, and what the mayor's priorities are to fund those aspects of the org chart.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, so that's really my kind of my update at this point. I'm sorry I don't have more information, but we will definitely be circling back to you. And this is complicated and bifurcated in all these separate memos. And so if people are confused and have questions, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. I know we all appreciate the information. I'm going to open it up for questions now, specifically for Shannon and talking about the budget for the new organizational structure. If we have time after that, we'll go back to additional questions regarding the transition budget. With that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Terry.
Thanks for that. And I skimmed the budget memo, and it says, and maybe you were talking about that towards the end of your talk, that there's another memo that's going to talk specifically about how to do the charter. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. So when if you all have a chance to look at that memo that I believe Julia put in the chat, the title of the section, it's called Charter Transition Costs. And I'll just read it to you because it's really short. It says, as we continue to implement charter changes, CBO will release a technical guidance memo that will provide additional details on how these costs will be budgeted and funded. This guidance will be based on the service area assessment reports that are due on December 29th to the charter transition team.
Okay, so the question I have, and it's just an ongoing question from November, is that I think the city council itself is wildly underfunded. And what has happened is that the idea that you could essentially realign the positions within the city council to the expanded city council means you don't get the same kinds of positions doing the same kind of work. What you have is a bunch of policy people being shunted out to be individual council members, staffers, leaving a real lack of capacity in the council research, the bill drafting, committee staffing, all of that sort of stuff. So there's a structural problem there that I don't know how it gets solved. I don't know how it gets solved. If the budget folks are just doing the budgeting around that org chart and nobody's taking a look at how that org chart's going to work in the long run, at what point do we, the GTAC, or we, the citizens, have input to somebody to say, we got to fix this?
Tate, do you want to go over quickly just the council operations piece and kind of talk through that?
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Terry. I want to be respectful of time so we can follow up as needed, but the plan is for that shared council operations group to really be able to provide a lot of that legislative and committee support. But as we've discussed, you know, it's foundational. It's gonna need to grow, and hopefully that will happen in future years. But in short, I would just say I think the upcoming budget process would really be the best time to share your thoughts with council as the decision makers. And you know, we are in a fiscally constrained environment, so here's hoping that we'll be able to continue to grow that council staff support over time. So that's my short answer, and of course, Harry, we can continue to talk more.
Yeah, I know. I've heard the short answer. I just think that by the time I'm testifying for my 3 minutes to the council in June or July, whenever it is too late. It's going to be baked in with these memos that come out in January. And you know, now's the time to fix this if we're going to fix it. And waiting for a future council to fix the problems that you're going to leave them is kind of unfair. You know, the one thing that is not going over budget in the whole transition appears to be council operations. And that's because you restructured it to take the meat out of it.
Well,
anyway, you know where I stand.
We were directed by the decision makers to provide a level funded model, so we didn't have an option to add on, but we will continue to ask.
Terry, I appreciate your comment about timing. And I encourage you to, you know, if there's consensus across the GTAC for the GTAC to submit a letter, and we will absolutely have that letter reach the folks that are decision makers. But like Tate mentioned, we were directed to develop a proposal. And yeah, I think that you've seen from our current council interactions, there is not a tremendous amount of support for funding these activities. That does not mean that we don't support them. And so your advocacy, we would support your advocacy. We recommended 2 staff for every council offices, and the Cal target includes 1. So it is not, we are not the audience for your concerns, but we will carry your concerns where we go.
That's helpful, Shoshana. Terry, is there any last follow-up you want to make? No? Okay. Great information, though. Destiny, I saw that you put in a question about number of staff allocated for, I think Shoshana just answered that there's 1 allocated. Does anyone else have any questions at this time for Shannon or in regards to the budget for the new organizational structure in general? No. Since we have some time, we have about 5 minutes extra. Do people have questions that they want to go back and ask about the transition budget update that Shoshana gave? Joe?
Yeah, let me take a crack at just one question. There's $210,000 in organizational grants for hard to reach voter contract. Will GTAC be able to work with those community-based organizations somehow related to those contracts to help us reach those hard to reach communities on things that are broader than voter education?
Is that question to Julia on how I'm sorry, is it a voter education question? Because I think without Sophia, I'd like to circle back on that answer.
I think that our charge is broader than voter education. And if these funds, if these organizations are on board to do voter education, are they also on board to do broader outreach and engagement with us?
James, do you want to jump in here? I know that we've had conversations about voter education and a more general community education.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump
Yeah,
in?
I'm happy to. So, Joe, specifically the 210,000 that you're talking about falls under the contract with United Way. So that's specifically subgrants that are, and that contract is about ranked choice voting and about the election method changes. So although I'm sure questions may arise and conversations may have, their target is not the more general transition piece. So that $210 that under that subgrant doesn't specifically include GTAC. Now, all of the information, the material that's going to those, the trainers that you have already seen, and we sort of are adjusting it with your feedback and all that, that's the trainer that will go to them. All that feedback we get from the voter ethics committee, that will trickle down to them. So there is an involvement there with GTAC, but those funds are not specifically for GTAC engagement. If there are other funds, I'd let Julia or Sean or somebody speak to that. But that 210 you're referencing is sub-grant money going to communities. That the intention is to put out several RFPs, get community leaders and community organizations that are directly working in those communities, train them on the new methods, and then they will take that to their communities. Hopefully that kind of makes it a little more clear.
Thanks, James. Bill, I'm going to pass it over to you for the final question before we close things out.
Oh, certainly. Well, thank you. Just a general question that, turning back to all the budget expertise we have here, at the city, is if this budget or summary were presented to you, what questions would you ask, or I mean, how would you analyze it? In terms of figures, I'm not expecting answers, but it's more your analytic ability, or I mean, when you look at those figures, what questions are you asking yourself? I mean, that could help me anyway, help us look at this budget.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Bill. I'll jump in here, and of course, Shannon, if you have any follow-up. We are, as others on the call have already identified, going into an incredibly fiscally constrained environment. And so we are looking at this budget very carefully and looking at our deliverables and our expectation to implement the will of the voters very carefully, and identifying what we need in order to make that promise true. And we are also being very realistic and not asking for all of the many things that we would love to fund in a more generous financial climate. Our colleagues are facing layoffs due to reductions in a variety of different funding sources that come to the city. So we take our pledge to be fiscally responsible with our residents' tax dollars very seriously. So I think that this is a fundable budget, and it is a responsible budget. And I think that we will be able to do a lot with it. Would we like more resources? Absolutely. Do we think we need to leverage additional resources at the city in order to stretch these dollars as far as we can? Absolutely. But that is the approach that we're taking with this proposal.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Shoshana, Shannon, Tate, June, and Julia for all the great information tonight. Really appreciated it. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Jose to close things out for us.
Jose, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just asking to go to the next slide. Thank you, Leah. Thank you very much, everyone, as always, for the great questions. And like always, any questions not answered during the meeting will receive answers in writing and be posted online. The transition staff will work as quickly as they can, but the response time really depends on the complexity of the question and if the answer requires a review by the city attorney. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the committee's website and is available after the meeting ends on the Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. The third meeting of the Voter and Candidate Education and Outreach Committee is January 9th. Our next regular full committee meeting is Wednesday, January 10th. And the third meeting of the Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee is January 19th. Next slide, please. On January 10th, the agenda includes the 2024 engagement strategies, the city's budgeting process, the 24-25 transition budget, and change management, and employee management. I'm sure Juliet will love that. All our scheduled meetings are on the transition website. Next slide, please. And with that, I want to thank everyone for your participation tonight, and we are now adjourned.